The twin moons hung above the alien sky, casting a pale light over the rocky ground. Far below, inside a cage of iron, a lone human sat with his wrists bound. His name was Elias Kane, once a soldier on Earth, now nothing more than a prisoner on this strange world. Around him, towering reptilian figures moved with cruel grace. These were the Drakthar, a proud race that worshipped dragons as living gods. Every year, the Drakthar held a ritual sacrifice. A human would be thrown into the dragon pit, a vast underground cavern where a colossal dragon named Vithar waited. No one had ever survived. Elias could hear the chants echoing through the valley. The Drakthar wore black and gold armor. Their scaled faces twisted with delight. "Another fragile human for Vithar!" One of them sneered, pointing his sharp spear at the cage. Elias stayed silent, his sharp eyes scanning the area. He had been captured during a raid months ago, and every day since then he had been treated as little more than an animal. Now, he was to be entertainment for their monstrous god. Two Drakthar guards unlocked the cage and dragged him out. The ground was rough beneath his bare feet, but Elias didn't fight back. He saved his strength. He knew he would need every ounce of it. The guards marched him to the edge of a massive pit. It stretched so far that Elias couldn't see the bottom. A deep heat rose from below, carrying the smell of ash and scorched bones. The chanting grew louder as the Drakthar gathered around. A Drakthar priest stepped forward, his tall staff glowing with strange runes. "Vithar, eater of worlds, accept this gift. Accept this weak creature as tribute." The crowd roared. Elias looked down into the abyss. For a moment, fear gripped him like ice. The stories he had heard from other prisoners about the dragon's fiery breath, its claws like swords, its cunning intelligence, played in his mind. One of the guards shoved him hard. Elias fell. The wind howled past his ears as he plummeted. Rocks scraped his arms and legs. Then, with a bone-shaking thud, he landed on the hard ground far below. Pain shot through his body, but nothing felt broken. He pushed himself up, groaning. The pit was massive, lit by rivers of glowing molten rock that snaked across the floor. Bones of past sacrifices lay scattered everywhere, human skulls, charred, armor, broken weapons. A deep rumble filled the cavern. Elias froze. From the shadows, something huge moved. Two blazing golden eyes opened, followed by a long neck covered in shimmering black scales. Then came the wings, massive, jagged, and powerful enough to block out the glowing rivers of light. The dragon Vithar stepped forward. Its claws cracked the stone as easily as glass. Smoke curled from its nostrils, and its deep voice rumbled. "Like thunder inside Elias's head. Another offering," it said with a strange amusement. "How many of you pitiful creatures must die before your kind learns?" Elias's heart pounded. The dragon wasn't just a beast. It was intelligent. Slowly, he backed away, his eyes darting around. He needed a weapon. Any weapon. He spotted a long, jagged bone near a pile of skulls. Diving for it, he grabbed it and held it like a spear. It was crude, but better than nothing. Vithar laughed, a terrifying, echoing sound. "You fight? Interesting. I enjoy prey that struggles." The dragon lunged. Elias rolled to the side as a claw smashed into the ground where he had stood. Dust and shards of rock flew everywhere. He stumbled to his feet, gripping his makeshift spear tighter. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for something more. All his life, Elias had heard people say that humans were fragile compared to the other races of the galaxy. But fragility didn't mean weakness. Humans could adapt. They could think. They could fight in ways no one expected. The dragon loomed above him, ready to strike again, and Elias Kane, the man the Drakthar had thrown away as nothing, stood his ground. Vithar's golden eyes glowed brighter as the dragon lowered its massive head, staring at Elias like a curious predator. The cavern trembled as the beast moved closer, its claws scraping against the stone floor. The air grew hotter with every breath the dragon exhaled. Elias gripped the jagged bone tightly. His heart raced, but his mind stayed sharp. Years of survival training told him one thing: panic meant death. The dragon tilted its head, almost amused. "You think a broken bone can harm me?" it asked, its deep voice echoing inside his skull. Elias didn't answer. He kept moving, circling toward a cluster of fallen rocks. He needed to stay out of reach. He needed time to think. With a sudden roar, Vithar lunged forward. Its massive jaws snapped shut where Elias had been a moment earlier. Elias rolled across the rough ground, the heat from the dragon's breath burning his skin. He scrambled to his feet, keeping the bone spear ready. Vithar laughed, a chilling sound. "Good reflexes, but you cannot run forever." Elias glanced around. The cavern was huge, filled with rivers of molten rock and tall stone spires. Bones of past sacrifices were everywhere, some charred black, some shattered to pieces. Among them, he saw scraps of metal, perhaps from armor or weapons of the dragon's earlier victims. He sprinted toward one of the piles, ignoring the dragon's thunderous footsteps behind him. Just as he reached for a piece of metal, a shadow fell over him. Whoosh! A blast of scorching fire roared past him, melting the stone where he had been standing. The heat was unbearable, but Elias forced himself to keep moving. He dove behind a tall rock spire as the dragon's tail smashed down, shattering the ground. "Think, Elias! Think!" He quickly grabbed a sharp metal shard from the pile and tied it to the end of the bone with a strip of cloth torn from his sleeve. It wasn't perfect, but now he had a real spear. The dragon stepped closer, smoke curling from its nostrils. "You amuse me, little human," Vithar said. "I will savor your struggle." Elias knew he couldn't overpower the dragon, but he could outsmart it. He picked up a small rock and threw it toward a molten river. The splash drew the dragon's gaze for a split second. Using the distraction, Elias climbed up the spire, spear in hand. Vithar turned back just as Elias leaped off the rock, aiming for the dragon's head. The spear struck true, slamming into the dragon's left eye. The cavern shook with a deafening roar of pain. Vithar thrashed wildly, its tail smashing into the ground, sending rocks flying in every direction. Elias hit the floor hard, rolling to avoid the dragon's claws. Blood as dark as molten metal dripped from the wounded eye. The Drakthar, watching from above, gasped in shock. No human had ever injured Vithar before. Rage burned in the dragon's voice. "You dare wound me?" it thundered, fire leaking from its jaws. Elias didn't wait. He darted behind another spire as Vithar unleashed a torrent of fire, turning the ground into a sea of flames. Sweat poured down Elias's face as the heat closed in around him. His chest ached, his muscles screamed for rest, but he forced himself to stay focused. The dragon, blinded in one eye, roared again, shaking its massive head. Elias could see the fury in its remaining eye, but also something else. Fear. For the first time, Vithar realized that this prey was different. Elias gritted his teeth. "You're not as invincible as they think, are you?" he muttered under his breath. The dragon growled, smoke billowing from its mouth. "I will burn you to ash, human, and when you scream, your kind will remember their place." But Elias only tightened his grip on the spear. He wasn't going to die here, not today. From above, the Drakthar murmured in disbelief. This was not the weak sacrifice they had expected. Down below, in the heart of the pit, the first true battle between man and dragon had begun, and for the first time in centuries, Vithar knew what it meant to be hunted. The cavern still echoed with Vithar's furious roars. The dragon circled the pit, its injured eye glowing faintly as dark molten blood dripped onto the ground. Smoke curled from its jaws, and every step it took made the floor tremble. Elias hid behind a cluster of rocks, breathing hard. His hands shook from exhaustion, but his mind stayed sharp. He knew that his small spear could never kill the dragon in a direct fight. If he wanted to survive, he had to use his head. The dragon is huge, strong, but it's also proud, Elias thought. Pride can make it careless. He looked around the cavern again. Bones, broken weapons, jagged rocks, molten rivers. Everything here could become a tool. Humans might be weaker than other species, but they could adapt. That was their strength. Elias got to work. First, he searched the piles of bones for stronger pieces, picking out long, sharp fragments. Then he found a melted metal plate, still sharp along the edges. With strips of cloth from his torn clothes, he tied the sharp bones together to create crude spikes. Next, he studied the molten rivers. Some ran close to narrow stone bridges that crossed them. If he could lure the dragon there, he might have a chance to strike. While Elias worked, Vithar prowled the cavern. "You cannot hide forever," the dragon's deep voice rumbled. "I will find you, and your end will be slow." Elias didn't answer. He kept moving quietly, setting bone spikes in places where the dragon might step. He used the heat from the molten rivers to weaken parts of the ground, loosening rocks so they could fall at the right moment. The plan was dangerous, but it was his only chance. Finally, he picked up a heavy bone and threw it across the cavern. It clattered loudly against the rocks. Vithar turned instantly, its good eye narrowing. "There you are." The dragon charged. Elias ran toward the stone bridge, his feet pounding against the ground. The heat from the molten rivers rose in waves. But he didn't stop. He heard the dragon's massive claws slamming into the ground behind him. At the last moment, Elias leapt to the side. Vithar's foot came down on one of the hidden spikes. The dragon roared in pain as the bone tore into its flesh. It stumbled slightly, its weight shaking the bridge. Elias grabbed another sharp bone and hurled it at the dragon's wounded leg. It wasn't much, but it drew more molten blood, angering. "Vithar, even further! You dare mock me!" the dragon bellowed, furious now. It lunged forward, snapping its jaws. Elias ducked behind a rock pillar, then grabbed one of the loose stones he had prepared earlier. With all his strength, he shoved it down. The heavy rock crashed into the dragon's snout. It wasn't enough to hurt it badly, but it startled Vithar just enough for Elias to run again. This time he climbed another tall spire, keeping his spear ready. The dragon swung its massive tail, smashing the spire in half. Elias jumped at the last second, landing hard on the ground but keeping hold of his spear. He was bleeding from a cut on his arm, but his eyes stayed fierce. The Drakthar watching from above had grown silent. Their faces no longer showed amusement. They were watching something they had never seen before. A human, fighting not with fear, but with intelligence. Elias backed away slowly, keeping the molten river between himself and the dragon. "Come, on," he whispered, his voice steady. "You think you're smarter than me? Prove it!" Vithar snarled, stepping closer. The heat from the molten river distorted the air, but Elias didn't move. He was waiting. Finally, the dragon stepped too, close. Its foot landed on another spike and its balance faltered. Elias seized the moment. He hurled his spear with all his strength. The spear struck the dragon's wounded eye again. Vithar roared so loudly that the cavern walls shook, molten rock splashing high into the air. Elias dove for cover, knowing he had only made the dragon angrier. But deep inside, he felt hope for the first time. He had hurt it again, and now the great Vithar finally understood. This prey would not die quietly. This prey would fight until the very end. Vithar's furious roars echoed through the cavern, shaking loose stones from the ceiling. The dragon's golden eye burned with rage, molten blood dripping from its injured wounds. Smoke curled from its nostrils as it searched for Elias, each step heavy enough to crack the ground. Elias crouched behind a rock wall, breathing hard. His body ached, and his arms were weak, but his mind stayed sharp. He knew this battle could not last forever. At some point, he would run out of strength, and the dragon would kill him. I need to end this now, he thought. One chance, one strike. That matters. Elias looked around at the cavern once more. The molten rivers flowed like glowing snakes, and heat waves shimmered in the air. Bones of past victims were everywhere, long, strong bones that could be turned into weapons. He found one as tall as his chest, sharp at one end. It reminded him of a spearhead. Nearby there were heavy rocks loose on the ledge above. An idea formed. He dragged the long bone toward one of the molten rivers. With strips of cloth torn from his clothes, he wrapped the bone tightly and dipped the sharp end into the molten rock. The heat turned it red hot, almost glowing. This would be his killing weapon, but it wasn't enough to simply stab the dragon. Vithar was too strong, too armored. He needed to lure the dragon into a trap. Elias studied the ground. Some parts near the molten rivers were weaker, cracked from heat. If the dragon stepped there with full force, it could lose balance for just a moment, long enough for Elias to strike. He placed the glowing spear near the weak ground and set several sharp bone spikes nearby. Then he hid behind a rock and picked up a loose stone. He threw it hard against another rock. The sound echoed loudly. Vithar turned its head instantly, its one good eye narrowing. "Still running, human? You only delay your end," the dragon charged. Elias darted out, making sure the dragon followed him. He ran as fast as he could, his heart pounding, every step bringing him closer to the trap. When Elias reached the weak ground, he jumped aside at the last second. Vithar's massive foot came down with a thunderous crack. The weakened ground shattered under its weight, and for a moment, the dragon stumbled. Elias grabbed the glowing spear. With a roar of his own, he leapt forward and drove the weapon deep into the soft spot in the dragon's neck, where its scales were thinnest. The spear sank in with a sickening hiss. Vithar let out a roar so loud it felt like the cavern itself was breaking apart. It thrashed violently, its tail smashing into rocks, sending shards flying everywhere. Elias held on, pushing the spear deeper with all his strength. Finally, the dragon shook its head violently, throwing Elias to the ground. He rolled across the rough floor, landing hard but keeping his eyes on the beast. Vithar staggered, molten blood pouring from the wound. Its movements grew slower, weaker. From above, the Drakthar were silent. For the first time, fear crept into their proud faces. The dragon took a final step forward, its massive body swaying. It let out one last roar, shaking the cavern walls. Then it collapsed. The ground shook as the mighty Vithar fell, its body sprawling across the cavern floor. Elias stood there, breathing hard, covered in sweat and ash. His arms trembled, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But he had done it. He had killed the beast that no one believed could die. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then slowly, the Drakthar began to murmur in disbelief. The weak human had done the impossible. Elias looked up at them, his eyes burning with determination. "This isn't the end," he whispered to himself. "This is just the beginning." The dragon's corpse lay as proof. Humans were not prey. They could fight back, and Elias Kane would make sure the whole world remembered it. The great cavern grew quiet after Vithar's fall. The mighty dragon, once the feared god of the Drakthar, now lay still, defeated by a human's courage and wit. Elias Kane stood tall, his body bruised, but his spirit unbroken. The Drakthar warriors and priests gathered at the edge of the pit, their eyes wide with shock. For centuries, they had believed dragons were unbeatable, and humans were weak and easy prey. Now everything had changed. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow and looked up at the faces watching him. He saw fear, but also something else. Respect. One of the Drakthar priests stepped forward. His voice was low and serious. "Human, you have proven your strength and heart. You have broken the curse of the dragon pit." Elias nodded slowly. "I did not come here to be a sacrifice. I came here to survive, and to show that humans are fighters." A murmur spread through the crowd. The Drakthar, proud and strong, had never heard a human speak like this before. From the rocky cliffs above, other humans who had been captured and forced into slavery watched silently. Their eyes were filled with hope for the first time. If Elias could survive the dragon, maybe they could survive too. Maybe they could fight back. Word of Elias's victory spread quickly through the Drakthar lands. Stories of the human who defeated. The great dragon traveled from village to village. More and more humans, held captive or oppressed, began to believe they were not helpless. Elias became a symbol, not just of survival, but of hope. He started teaching others what he had learned in the pit. How to use the land, how to think faster than stronger enemies, and how courage could overcome fear. Slowly, a resistance grew. The Drakthar leaders tried to crush this new hope. They sent soldiers to capture Elias and silence the humans. But the humans fought back, inspired by the man who had faced a dragon and won. Elias led small groups on, daring raids, freeing prisoners and gathering weapons. They learned to move quickly, strike hard, and never give up. In the darkest places, where hope seemed lost, Elias's story was a light. One night, as the twin moons shone overhead, Elias stood before a growing crowd of humans and some Drakthar who had begun to question their leaders. He raised his voice strong and clear. "We are not weak. We are not meant to be slaves or sacrifices. We are survivors. We are fighters. Together, we will change this world." Cheers rose from the crowd. The long battle was just beginning, but Elias knew they had won the most important fight, the fight for hope. In a world that once saw humans as weak, Elias Kane had shown that humanity's greatest power was the will to survive, the courage to stand, and the mind to fight back. The Dragon Pit was no longer a place of death. It was a place of new beginnings.